Part 1. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the phone on the nightstand began to vibrate, not ring, not buzz, but vibrate in short, nervous pulses, like it already knew the message it carried would change everything. Mark Holloway stared at the ceiling for a full 3 seconds before reaching for it, because in 20 years as a field investigator for the U.S. Department of Justice, calls that came at 2:17 a.m. were never accidents, never small, and never survivable for the truth they dragged into the light. Yeah, he said, voice rough, already awake in the way men get when they sense history shifting. You need to turn on the TV, the voice replied. Female. Controlled. Someone who had practiced staying calm when the ground gave way beneath her feet. Every channel. Now. Mark didn't ask why. He swung his legs off the bed, the cold floor biting into his soles, and clicked on the television just as a red banner tore across the screen. Breaking news. The anchor's face was pale, the studio lights reflecting off a thin sheen of sweat as if even the building itself understood what was being said. Unconfirmed reports of a sealed federal indictment involving senior government officials, multiple intelligence agencies, and a classified program allegedly operating for over a decade under executive authority. Mark's phone vibrated again. A text this time. It's real. They're moving. File name, Black Atlas. His breath slowed, his jaw tightening. Black Atlas wasn't supposed to exist. It was a ghost file, a rumor whispered in closed corridors, a phrase that ended conversations and careers. Mark had chased it once, 10 years ago, until his supervisor pulled him aside and told him, in a voice that carried both warning and regret, that some truths weren't illegal to uncover, just fatal. On the TV, the anchor continued, sources claim the program operated outside congressional oversight, utilizing private contractors, off-the-books funding, and foreign facilities. The screen split. Live footage now. Federal buildings. Emergency lights. Men and women in suits moving fast, heads down, phones pressed to ears. Washington, D.C. was waking up to a nightmare it had pretended for years didn't exist. Mark grabbed his jacket, keys, and gun in one fluid motion. He didn't bother dressing properly. There wouldn't be time. As he stepped outside, the night air felt electric, heavy with the kind of tension that precedes riots, resignations, and revelations that rewrite textbooks. His phone rang again. Tell me you're seeing this, said the voice on the other end. David Klein, former CIA analyst. Current liability. One of the few people Mark trusted. I'm seeing it, Mark replied. Talk fast. They found the vault, David said. Not metaphorical. Physical. Underground facility. Nevada desert. The documents are authentic. Video 2. Mark stopped walking. Video of what? There was a pause. A long one. Of us, David said quietly. Of things done in our name. And of people who never existed, until tonight. The line went dead. Mark stood under a flickering streetlight, the hum of electricity matching the pulse in his skull. Nevada. Desert. Vault. His instincts screamed one word: containment. Whatever Black Atlas was, it was never designed to survive exposure. His phone buzzed again. Another text. Unknown number. You were never meant to see this. But you always ask the right questions. If you want answers, drive east. 4 hours. Do not bring anyone. Do not contact any agency. They are not on your side. A set of coordinates followed. Mark laughed once, short, humorless. This was how it always started. An anonymous savior. A secret meeting. A chance to finally pull the thread. He should have deleted the message. Instead, he typed back one word. When. The reply was instant. Now. The drive east felt longer than 4 hours. The roads were empty in that eerie, pre-dawn way that made every mile feel watched. Mark kept the radio off, relying on the blue glow of the dashboard and the constant scan of his mirrors. Twice, he was sure he saw headlights appear and vanish behind him. Once, his GPS recalculated without explanation. At 6:42 a.m., he reached the coordinates, an abandoned rest stop, closed for renovation that never came. The sign was rusted, the parking lot cracked and overgrown, the bathrooms boarded shut. It was the kind of place the country forgot, and that made it perfect. A single car waited near the edge of the lot. Engine off. Lights dark. Mark parked 20 yards away and stepped out slowly, hand near his jacket. A woman emerged from the shadows. Early 40s. Sharp eyes. Calm posture. The kind of person who knew how to disappear in a crowd or a file system. My name is Evelyn Ross, she said. Former Oversight Counsel for the Senate Intelligence Committee. Until last night. Mark didn't relax. You sent the message. She nodded. I didn't have much time to choose. Choose what? Who might survive knowing the truth? She reached into her coat slowly, carefully, and held up a flash drive. This is a fraction of Black Atlas, she said. Enough to destroy reputations. Enough to collapse alliances. Enough to get both of us killed. Mark stared at the drive. Why me? Because you walked away 10 years ago instead of signing off, Evelyn replied. Because you asked why detainees vanished instead of where they were sent. Because when they told you to stop, you actually did, but you never forgot. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. They're calling it a national security breach, she continued. But it's not a breach. It's an exposure. And once people see what's on this drive, the question won't be who leaked it. It'll be how this was allowed to happen at all. Mark took the drive. It felt heavier than it should have. What's the endgame? He asked. Evelyn met his gaze. There isn't one, she said. Not yet. Only momentum. And momentum is dangerous. In the distance, a low rumble echoed. Engines. Multiple. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward the sound. They tracked you faster than I hoped. Mark clenched his jaw. Tracked how? She gave a thin smile. Through systems you helped build. The rumble grew louder. Evelyn stepped back. If they catch us together, the story ends here. You need to leave. Now. What about you? I've already been erased, she said softly. You still exist. Use that. Sirens cut through the air. Mark turned, sprinting for his car as headlights crested the road behind them, black SUVs moving with purpose, not panic. As he peeled out of the lot, gravel spraying, his phone buzzed one last time. A news alert. Federal officials confirm Operation Black Atlas was misinterpreted. Public urged to remain calm. Mark laughed again, this time louder, as the road stretched ahead of him like a question with no safe answer. In his pocket, the flash drive burned like a confession. And somewhere deep in the desert, a vault that was never meant to be opened stood empty, its secrets already rewriting the future. End of Part 1. Part 2. Mark didn't slow down until the gas gauge dipped below half and the sun climbed high enough to burn the last of the night from the horizon. The highway blurred into a ribbon of concrete and heat, every mile putting distance between him and the rest stop, between him and Evelyn Ross, who was either already in custody or already dead. He kept driving because stopping would mean thinking, and thinking would mean acknowledging the weight of the flash drive pressing against his ribs. Like a second, colder heart. The radio crackled to life without his touch. Officials insist there is no credible threat to public safety, a calm voice said, practiced and hollow. Authorities urge citizens to disregard unverified reports circulating online. Mark reached over and shut it off. He'd heard that tone before. He'd used it himself once, long ago, when he'd been asked to stand in front of a room and explain why a man's name would never appear on any record again. He took the next exit, a nameless stretch of road leading toward a cluster of low buildings and a diner that looked like it had been built to be forgotten. He parked behind it, where the dumpsters sat baking in the sun, and finally allowed himself to breathe. Inside his car, he pulled the flash drive from his pocket. Black Atlas. The label was handwritten. Old school. Deliberate. Someone had wanted this to feel physical, undeniable. Mark slid it into his laptop, shielding the screen instinctively, even though no one else was around. The folder tree unfolded slowly, like it resented being disturbed. Videos, memos, financial ledgers, psychological profiles, and one folder marked proof of concept. Mark opened it. The first video began without sound. Grainy footage of a room, white walls, bolted chair, fluorescent lights. A man sat restrained, his face bruised, his eyes alert in a way that suggested he knew exactly where he was and what that meant. Timestamp 2014. The audio cut in. State your name for the record, a voice said. I don't have one anymore, the man replied. You took it. Mark's throat tightened. The next files were worse. Not because of violence, though there was that, but because of intent. Black Atlas wasn't just detention. It wasn't interrogation. It was erasure. A system designed to remove individuals not just from society, but from history itself. Names scrubbed. Families redirected. Digital footprints rewritten. People transformed into administrative ghosts. And then there were the approvals. Signatures. Not just one administration. Not just one party. A relay race of consent passed from hand to hand, justified by fear, inertia, and the seductive promise that someone else would take responsibility later. Mark leaned back, closing his eyes. This was bigger than he'd imagined. Bigger than any single leak, any single whistleblower. His phone rang. David Klein's name lit the screen. You're alive, David said, relief bleeding through the sarcasm. For now, Mark replied. They followed me. They followed everyone, David said. You need to listen carefully. Black Atlas wasn't exposed by accident. Mark frowned. What do you mean? The vault in Nevada. David continued. It wasn't found. It was unlocked. Mark straightened. By who? That's the problem, David said. No breach alarms. No forced entry. Someone with top-tier clearance walked in and handed the world a loaded gun. Mark glanced at the laptop. Evelyn said momentum is dangerous. She was right, David replied. The leak triggered contingency protocols. Internal ones. I'm talking about countermeasures designed to discredit, distract, and if necessary, eliminate the narrative. And me, David exhaled. You're already being framed. The words landed like a physical blow. For what? For leaking Black Atlas, David said. For coordinating with foreign actors. For destabilizing national security. Mark laughed bitterly. That was fast. They needed a face, David continued. Someone credible enough to sell the story, expendable enough to burn. Mark's mind raced. What about the evidence? The videos? The files? They'll say it's fabricated, David said. Deepfakes. AI-generated disinformation. The public's already primed to doubt everything. Mark looked at the diner's back door, half expecting agents to burst through it. So what's the move? A pause. There's a failsafe, David said quietly. Something buried inside Black Atlas. Something they never expected to be used. Mark's fingers tightened around the phone. You're talking like you've seen it. I have, David replied. Years ago. I didn't understand it then. I do now. What is it? A ledger, David said. Not money. People. Every erased identity tied to a living sponsor. Someone high enough that exposure would be catastrophic. Mark's pulse quickened. You're saying Black Atlas can't be denied without implicating the very people denying it. Exactly, David said. Mutually assured destruction. Mark closed the laptop. Where is this ledger? David hesitated. That's the catch. It's fragmented. Split across nodes. Analog backups. Digital shadows. And the only person who knew how to reassemble it. Evelyn, Mark said. Yes, David confirmed. Or whoever has her now. A siren wailed in the distance. Not close. Not yet. They're locking down the narrative, David continued. Press conferences. Emergency hearings. Within 24 hours, the story will shift from what happened to who betrayed us. Mark leaned against the steering wheel. Then we don't give them 24 hours. Silence. You're thinking broadcast, David said. I'm thinking undeniable, Mark replied. Not leaks. Not clips. The whole structure. Names, signatures, faces. David laughed softly. You always did aim high. You said there was a failsafe, Mark pressed. Help me find it. Another pause. Longer this time. There's a server farm in Pennsylvania, David said. Officially defunct. Privately maintained. One of the nodes is still live. Mark's eyes narrowed. And you know this how? Because I helped design the redundancy, David admitted. And because someone logged into it an hour ago. Who? An oversight account, David said. One that should have been decommissioned years ago. Mark's mind snapped back to the rest stop, to Evelyn's calm voice, her certainty. She's alive, Mark said. Or she wanted us to think she is, David replied. Either way, that note is our best shot. Mark started the engine. David, he said, if this goes sideways. It will, David cut in. But if it goes right, the country wakes up. The call ended. As Mark pulled back onto the road, his phone buzzed again. A notification from a major news outlet. Former DOJ investigator Mark Holloway named person of interest in massive data breach. His face stared back at him from the screen. Old photo. Official. Condemned. Mark shut off the phone and drove faster, the road ahead narrowing into a single, unavoidable truth. Black Atlas was no longer a secret. It was a weapon. And someone had just pulled the pin. End of Part 2, Part 3. By the time Mark crossed into Pennsylvania, the manhunt had a name, a face, and a narrative carefully stitched together by people who had spent their lives controlling outcomes. Every digital billboard he passed flashed some variation of the same headline. Every radio station echoed the same phrases: rogue actor, foreign interference, unprecedented betrayal. The story was already solidifying, hardening into something that would be almost impossible to break once it fully set. Mark kept driving anyway. The server farm sat outside a dying steel town, hidden behind a shell company and a fence that looked more symbolic than secure. The sign at the entrance read Keystone Data Solutions, the paint faded, the logo peeling like the lie it represented. According to public records, the facility had been decommissioned 5 years earlier, its assets sold off, its staff reassigned. According to Black Atlas, it had never stopped breathing. Mark parked a quarter-mile down the road and walked the rest, hood up, cap low. Drones buzzed faintly overhead, commercial models, probably news, but he felt watched in a way that had nothing to do with machines. This place carried memory. It had seen things, stored things, swallowed things whole. He cut through a gap in the fence and slipped inside. The door lock was biometric. Old generation. Mark smiled grimly. He pressed his thumb to the reader, held his breath, and felt the faint vibration as the system accepted him. Some access never truly expired, it just waited. Inside, the air was cool and dry, the hum of dormant servers like a distant storm. Emergency lights glowed along the floor, guiding him deeper into the building. He followed the map David had sent, left, down 2 levels, past a sealed wing that officially didn't exist. The terminal room was smaller than he expected. No grand control center. Just a single workstation, cables running like veins into the walls, a red indicator light blinking steadily. Active. Mark slid into the chair and powered up the console. The login screen appeared. User, OVRST_17. Password, asterisk 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 asterisk. He didn't have to guess. He typed the name Evelyn had given him at the rest stop. Ross. The screen flickered, then resolved into a dashboard filled with fragmented files, incomplete logs, and one central directory marked Ledger Assembly, 42% complete. Mark's pulse spiked. She had been here, or someone using her credentials had. The system showed recent activity, manual inputs, cross-referencing old analog scans with newer digital records. Someone was rebuilding the spine of Black Atlas in real time. A message window popped open. You made it. Mark froze. Evelyn, he whispered, though he knew better than to trust what he couldn't see. Anomaly detected. Eyes everywhere. Limited time. Mark typed quickly. Are you alive? A pause. Then, alive is relative. They have me, but they don't have this. Not yet. Mark's jaw clenched. Where are you? Cannot say. They're monitoring metadata. Listen carefully. Another message appeared, this one flagged urgent. The ledger is more than a list. It's a map of dependency. Every erased person funded, authorized, and justified by someone WHO still holds power. Mark scrolled through the partial entries. Names of detainees, analysts, contractors. And next to them, sponsors. Senators, agency heads, CEOs, people whose faces filled Sunday morning talk shows. They'll never let this go public, Mark muttered. They can't stop it if it's complete, the message replied. But completion requires a key they thought was destroyed. Mark typed one word. What key? For the first time, the response took longer. Your consent. Mark stared at the screen. That's not funny. Black Atlas was built on layers of plausible deniability, Evelyn's words appeared. Every layer required a sign-off. Yours was the last one that never came. Mark's chest tightened. Memory surged. Meetings he'd walked out of, documents he'd refused to finalize, a career that had quietly stalled afterward. They used it anyway, he typed. Without me, yes. But the system was designed to collapse if that signature ever appeared later. A failsafe. Your failsafe. Mark leaned back, understanding dawning like a slow, brutal sunrise. If I sign now, he said aloud, it completes the ledger. And triggers automated distribution, Evelyn confirmed. Mirrored drops. International journalists. Courts. Archives. Too many targets to silence. And it paints an even bigger target on me. You already are the target. A sudden clang echoed down the corridor. Mark spun, heart hammering. Footsteps. Controlled. Multiple. They're here, he typed. No, came the reply. That's why I didn't come with you. The terminal chimed. Ledger assembly. 58%, 61%. Mark's phone vibrated violently. Incoming call. Unknown. He ignored it. The footsteps grew louder. What happens if I don't sign? He typed. They bury it. They bury me. They bury you. And Black Atlas becomes a template. Mark closed his eyes. He thought of the man in the chair from the first video. Of families told their loved ones had vanished by accident, by fate, by paperwork. Of a country that kept insisting it was different. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A voice called out, amplified, calm. Mark Holloway. This is Agent Rebecca Sloan with Homeland Security. We know you're inside. Come out peacefully, and we can talk. Mark opened his eyes. Ledger assembly. 79%. He placed his fingers on the keyboard. This ends one way, he whispered. He typed his name. Mark Holloway. The system paused. Confirm consent. This action is irreversible. The door began to shake as someone tried the handle. Mark, the voice outside warned, don't do this. Ledger assembly. 92%. Mark hit enter. The screen went white, then red. Distribution sequence initiated. Across the world, servers awakened. Files duplicated. Encrypted packages unlocked. Timers vanished. The truth, long compressed and hidden, began expanding outward like a shockwave. Alarms screamed in the hallway. Mark stood, heart pounding, as the terminal displayed one final message. "Thank you," it read. "I'm sorry it took this much." The door burst open. Agents flooded the room, weapons raised, shouting commands that blurred into noise. Mark raised his hands. Too late. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls of the server farm, the first headlines were already changing. And Black Atlas was no longer a secret, a weapon, or a threat. It was evidence. End of Part 3, Part 4. The holding room was windowless, deliberately neutral, the kind of place designed to make time lose meaning. Mark sat alone at a metal table bolted to the floor, his hands resting flat on the surface, uncuffed but never unguarded. The agents who had dragged him out of the server farm now stood on the other side of reinforced glass, silhouettes moving back and forth as phones rang and voices rose. Whatever plan they'd walked in with had evaporated the moment the distribution sequence went live. Somewhere, screens were lighting up. Somewhere, names were being recognized. Somewhere, people who had believed themselves untouchable were realizing the ground beneath them was not solid stone, but thin ice. The door opened. Agent Rebecca Sloan stepped in alone, her expression carefully composed. She carried a tablet but didn't look at it. Instead, she studied Mark the way one studies a fire after the flames have already jumped the line, no longer trying to stop it, just trying to understand how far it will spread. "You didn't just leak classified material," she said calmly. "You triggered an international incident." Mark shrugged. "That implies I did something wrong." She sat across from him. "You collapsed oversight mechanisms that exist for a reason." "No," Mark replied. "I exposed mechanisms that pretended to be oversight." Sloan exhaled slowly. "Do you have any idea what's happening right now?" Mark met her gaze. "Tell me." She tapped the tablet once, finally looking down. "Resignations. Emergency injunctions. 3 embassies have requested clarification on whether their citizens were part of a covert detention framework. 2 allied governments have frozen intelligence sharing pending review." She looked back up. "And that's just the first hour." Mark nodded. "Good." Her jaw tightened. "You're not the hero of this story." "I didn't try to be," Mark said. "I just refused to be the villain." A beat. "They're calling an emergency session of Congress," Sloan continued. "There will be hearings, closed-door inquiries, and a very public attempt to make this about process instead of people." "Won't work," Mark said. The ledger tied faces to fingerprints. "You can't proceduralize that." Sloan studied him for a long moment. "You really think this ends with accountability?" "No," Mark replied honestly. "I think it ends with resistance. Delay, counter-narratives, and maybe violence." Her eyes flicked to the glass wall. "Then why did it?" she asked quietly. Mark leaned forward. "Because the alternative was silence." The door opened again, this time with urgency. An aide leaned in, whispering into Sloane's ear. Her composure cracked just slightly. "They've confirmed Evelyn Ross," the aide said. "She was being held under a black site authority in Virginia. The order came down to transfer her an hour ago." "To where?" Sloan asked. The aide swallowed. "Nowhere. The transfer was intercepted. The vehicle never arrived." Mark's heart skipped. "Intercepted by who?" The aide shook his head. "Unknown. Clean operation. No insignia. No casualties. She's gone." Sloan straightened slowly, the implications sinking in. "Someone just stole a federal prisoner during a constitutional meltdown," Mark said. "That's bold." "It's terrifying," Sloan replied. "Because it means this isn't just fallout. It's phase 2. As if summoned by the words, the room's overhead screen flickered to life. A news anchor appeared, visibly rattled. Breaking developments continue to unfold as previously undisclosed documents linked to Operation Black Atlas surface across multiple international platforms. Among the materials are signed authorizations, internal communications, and video evidence allegedly depicting unlawful detentions. The feed switched to footage of protests, crowds gathering outside federal buildings, signs raised, chants echoing. Another cut showed a senator being escorted through a sea of microphones, refusing to answer questions. Another, a corporate CEO resigning live on air, his statement shaking in his hands. Mark watched in silence. "They're losing control," Sloan said. "Control was always an illusion," Mark replied. Her tablet chimed again. She glanced down, eyes widening. "What?" Mark asked. "The ledger didn't just distribute to journalists and courts," she said slowly. "It went to something else." Mark frowned. "Like what?" Sloan hesitated. "Like an autonomous archive system." International. Non-governmental. Immutable. Mark smiled faintly. You mean permanent? Yes, Sloan said. There's no recall. No injunction. No blackout capable of pulling it back. She looked at him with something dangerously close to admiration. You designed this fail-safe too well. I didn't design it, Mark said. I just refused to break it. The lights flickered. For the first time since he'd been detained, Mark felt a ripple of unease. The building hummed, generators kicking in as if anticipating trouble. What now? He asked. Sloan stood. Now we wait to see who panics. As if on cue, alarms began to sound, different from the earlier ones. Deeper. Structural. An agent burst into the room. We've got a situation. Network intrusion. Internal systems are being overridden. By who? Sloan demanded. The agent shook his head. By us. Or something wearing our skin. The screen shifted again. This time, it wasn't a news feed. It was a live video. Evelyn Ross appeared on screen, seated in a darkened room, her face illuminated by a single light. She looked tired but resolute. If you're watching this, she said, it means Black Atlas is no longer deniable. Sloan swore under her breath. Evelyn continued. This message was never meant to air publicly. It was designed as a contingency for those inside the system who believed exposure was impossible. Her eyes met the camera, unblinking. You were wrong. Behind her, files scrolled, names, dates, signatures. Attempts will be made to redirect blame, Evelyn said. To isolate individuals. To claim this was a rogue operation. It wasn't. She leaned forward. It was a choice. Repeated. Documented. Profitable. The feed cut. Silence flooded the room. Mark exhaled slowly. She's alive. Yes, Sloan said. And she just made things exponentially worse. Or better, Mark replied. Sloan looked at him sharply. You think this ends in reform? I think it ends in reckoning, Mark said. Reform comes later, if we're lucky. Outside the holding room, the building shook faintly as helicopters passed overhead. The world was no longer asking whether Black Atlas was real. It was asking how deep it went. And for the first time, the people who knew the answer were running out of places to hide. End of Part 4. Part 5. The first power outage hit Washington just after sunset, rolling across the city in a wave of darkness that swallowed monuments, offices, and illusions alike. Backup generators kicked in where they could, but the message was unmistakable, control was slipping, and whoever still believed they were steering events was lying to themselves. Mark felt it before he saw it. The holding room lights dimmed, then steadied, casting long shadows that made the walls feel closer. Somewhere above them, helicopters thudded through the air like anxious heartbeats. Sloane's phone buzzed nonstop. They're calling it a coordinated cyber attack, she said, pacing now, her earlier composure thinning. Foreign actors. Domestic extremists. Anyone but us. Mark leaned back in his chair. Classic. They've activated emergency authorities, Sloan continued. Communications restrictions. Media advisories. They're trying to slow the bleed. Can't slow gravity, Mark said. A muffled explosion echoed in the distance, not close enough to be felt, but close enough to be real. Sloan froze. That wasn't cyber, she said. No, Mark agreed. That was panic. The door opened again, and this time it wasn't an aide or an agent. It was a man in a dark suit with no visible credentials and eyes that never stopped moving. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Release him, the man said, nodding toward Mark. Sloan turned sharply. On whose authority? The man smiled thinly. Whose do you think? She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she stepped aside. The cuffs never came out. Mark stood on his own, aware that his status had just shifted from prisoner to asset, and that neither position was safe. They moved through corridors lined with armed personnel, past offices where televisions blared muted chaos. Headlines scrolled faster than anyone could read. Courts filing injunctions. Banks freezing accounts. Protests swelling into something more volatile. In a secure vehicle underground, the man finally spoke. You've created a problem, he said. And now you're going to help us solve it. Mark looked out the window at concrete rushing past. I didn't create it. I named it. The man chuckled. History is written by those who survive the naming. They stopped in a subterranean operations center that felt older than the building above it, a relic from a colder war. Screens filled the room, each showing a different fracture line spreading across the globe. Evelyn Ross appeared on one of them. Live again. She's coordinating disclosures, an analyst said. Not dumping everything at once. Sequencing it. For maximum impact. Smart, Mark said. Quietly. The man shot him a look. You still trust her? I trust the math, Mark replied. Truth plus time equals exposure. Or chaos, the man countered. Evelyn's voice filled the room. If you are watching this within the United States government, understand this. Attempts to suppress this information will result in accelerated release. Mark leaned forward. She's holding them hostage with their own secrets. And she'll lose, the man said. Eventually. Mark met his gaze. So will you. The man's smile vanished. Another analyst spoke up. Sir, foreign courts are issuing arrest warrants. Not symbolic ones. The room shifted. People stood straighter. Fear crept in where certainty used to live. The man turned back to Mark. You know how this ends. Scapegoats. Deals. A handful of resignations. Not this time, Mark said. The ledger made sure of that. Alarms blared again, this time internal. Unauthorized access to the archive, someone shouted. Mark's heart jumped. What archive? The analyst swallowed. The autonomous one. Someone's uploading testimony. The screens changed. Families appeared. Faces long erased. People telling stories that had never been allowed to exist. Mothers, brothers, wives, survivors who had been released quietly and told never to speak. Evelyn's voice returned, steadier than ever. This is the cost, she said. This is the human weight you buried under classifications and memos. The man in the suit stepped back as if struck. You didn't plan for this, Mark said softly. You planned for leaks, not witnesses. Outside, chants grew louder, bleeding through concrete and steel. Names were being spoken now, real ones. Sloan moved to Mark's side. They can't put this back in the box. No, Mark said. They can only decide how much of themselves they sacrifice to survive it. The man looked around the room, finally seeing what Mark had seen hours ago. A system built on secrecy doesn't collapse when exposed. It turns on itself. And somewhere in the chaos, Evelyn Ross was still moving, still choosing when and how the truth landed, shaping the storm rather than being swallowed by it. The countdown had begun, not to silence, but to consequence. End of Part 5, Part 6. The night fractured into hours that refused to behave like time. Mark lost track somewhere between the 5th emergency briefing and the 3rd evacuation order. The underground operations center buzzed with a nervous energy that bordered on delirium, analysts rotating out with red eyes and shaking hands, senior officials speaking in clipped half-sentences as if full thoughts had become too dangerous to complete. The truth had momentum now. Not viral, not chaotic, directed. Evelyn's sequencing was surgical. Each release answered the last denial before it could fully form. Each witness dismantled a defense that hadn't yet been spoken aloud. They were no longer reacting fast enough. She's forcing a binary choice, Sloan said quietly, standing beside Mark as a new wave of footage rolled across the screens. Confess or be exposed. Mark nodded. And anyone who chooses silence becomes evidence. An analyst turned in his chair. Sir, we've lost 3 cabinet-level officials. 2 resignations. 1 disappearance. The room stilled. Disappearance how? The man in the dark suit asked. Off the grid, the analyst replied. Private jet departed. Transponder disabled. Destination unknown. The man cursed under his breath. They're running. Mark crossed his arms. They always do. Another alarm chimed, different again. The sound of a system reaching a threshold. Sir, a technician said, voice tight, the autonomous archive just issued a compliance trigger. The man stiffened. That system doesn't issue triggers. It just did, the technician replied. It's invoking international oversight statutes. War crimes classification. Universal jurisdiction. The words hung heavy in the air. That means, Sloan began. Any participating nation is now legally obligated to act, Mark finished. Arrests. Extraditions. Seizures. The man turned on him. You wanted this. I wanted the truth, Mark said evenly. This is what it costs. On screen, Evelyn appeared again, this time standing. Behind her was daylight, real, open, undeniable. This is my final broadcast, she said. Not because I am done, but because the system no longer requires me. Mark felt a strange tightening in his chest. For years, we were told accountability would destabilize the nation, Evelyn continued. That some crimes were too dangerous to name. That secrecy was safety. She shook her head. They were wrong. The feed cut to a list, shorter now. Names crossed out. Actions taken. Arrested. Resigned. Under investigation. Sir, an aide said urgently to the man in the suit, foreign marshals have arrived at Dulles. They have warrants. The man looked around the room, finally understanding that whatever authority he believed he held had already expired. They're coming for all of us, he said. No, Mark replied. They're coming for the guilty. The man laughed bitterly. There's no clean line anymore. Mark met his gaze. There never was. The lights flickered again, then steadied. This time, the calm felt different. Final. Sloane's phone buzzed. She read the message, then looked at Mark. They found Evelyn, she said. Mark's heart lurched. Alive. Yes, Sloane said. Safe. She surrendered herself to an international tribunal. Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. She did that on purpose, he said. Sloane nodded. She took herself off the board. Or she put herself exactly where she needed to be, Mark corrected. Another screen lit up. A press conference. A new face at the podium, voice steady but eyes strained. Effective immediately, the official said, Operation Black Atlas is hereby acknowledged as unlawful. A special independent commission will be formed. Mark muted the sound. They're finally saying it, Sloane said. They're finally late, Mark replied. Outside, dawn began to creep into the city, pale and tentative. Sirens still echoed, but farther apart now. Less frantic. The storm was burning itself out. The man in the suit stood alone for a long moment, then straightened his jacket. I suppose this is where I disappear, he said quietly. Mark didn't respond. As the man walked out, escorted by people who no longer answered to him, Mark felt the weight of exhaustion settle into his bones. Not relief. Not victory. Just the quiet after impact. Sloane looked at him. What will you do? Mark considered the question. For the first time in days, the answer didn't feel like a reaction. I'll testify, he said. I'll answer questions. And then I'll walk away. And if they try to pull you back in. Mark looked toward the growing light. Then they've learned nothing. On the central screen, one final message appeared. No video, no signature. Black Atlas. Status. Archived. Access. Public. Erasure. Impossible. Mark closed his eyes. The truth had survived. All that remained was to see who would. End of Part 6. Part 7. The hearings began without ceremony. No dramatic gavels. No grand speeches. Just a long table, microphones, and a room packed with people who finally understood that history was no longer something that happened somewhere else. Mark sat under harsh lights, his nameplate plain, his expression unreadable. Cameras clicked, then stopped, as if even they sensed this wasn't a performance. He raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. For the first time in his career, the oath felt complete. He spoke for hours. About decisions made in hallways instead of chambers. About documents designed to protect careers rather than lives. About how Black Atlas hadn't been born evil, but bureaucratic, and how that made it far more dangerous. He named names without venom. He described systems without exaggeration. He let the facts do what they were always meant to do. Outside, the country listened. Some people were angry. Some were relieved. Many were both. Evelyn Ross testified the next day from The Hague. Calm. Precise. Unbreakable. When asked why she hadn't leaked everything at once, she answered simply. Because truth is not a bomb, she said. It's a structure. If you drop it all at once, people only see rubble. Around the world, consequences followed. Arrests. Extraditions. Trials that moved slowly but unmistakably forward. Entire departments were dissolved and rebuilt under public scrutiny. Laws once buried in footnotes were rewritten in plain language. Black Atlas, once a whispered threat, became a case study taught in ethics courses and intelligence academies alike, not as an anomaly, but as a warning. Not everyone faced justice. Some names faded into quiet exile. Some fortunes cushioned the fall. The world, Mark knew, never balanced its books perfectly. But it balanced them enough. Weeks later, Mark stood alone at a small gravesite on a hill overlooking a quiet town. No cameras. No officials. Just a simple marker bearing the name of a man who had vanished years earlier and had finally been returned to memory. I'm sorry it took so long, Mark said aloud. The wind carried the words away. His phone buzzed once. A message from Sloane. It's done. As done as it gets. Mark typed back. Good. He drove away without looking back. Months passed. The noise softened into something like understanding. The public moved on, as it always did, but with a scar it couldn't quite ignore. Systems changed, not because they wanted to, but because pretending nothing had happened was no longer possible. Black Atlas remained online, immutable, boring in the way only the truth can be once it stops being hidden. Mark never returned to government service. He taught instead. Small rooms. Curious minds. He told stories without heroics, emphasizing how easy it is to slide from protection into control, from secrecy into abuse. If you remember anything, he told his students, remember this: systems don't corrupt people. People corrupt systems by deciding they're the exception. One evening, long after the last class had left, Mark received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single page, no letterhead, no seal. You were right to sign. Nothing more. He smiled faintly and burned it in the sink. Outside, the world kept turning, messy, imperfect, loud. but a little more honest than it had been before. And somewhere deep in the digital bedrock of history, a file remained open forever, ensuring that what had once been erased could never be erased again. Not by power, not by fear, not by silence. End of part 7.